It's time to talk about the 30th anniversary Les Paul. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. When I've got this many brown cases out, you know we're gonna have some fun. And we also have a mystery to solve. So what is the 30th anniversary Gibson Les Paul? It's just a simple gold top, right? Nothing all that fancy. Wrong. There's a lot that was special to this guitar at that time. But to fully appreciate the topic of today, we need to talk a little bit of history about the Les Paul as well as the birthday babies. The first full year production of the Gibson Les Paul was in 1952. It looked like this. It had the P90 pickups with the trapeze tailpiece. In 54, they changed it to the wrap tail. 56, you see the introduction of the ABR1 bridge. 57, they bring out the humbuckers. And then 58, 59, they bring out the bursted colors. And then after 60, 61, we transition into the new SG looking body shape until the Les Paul comes back in 1968 in kind of a 1956-ish format before the Les Paul Deluxe is birthed. And the Les Paul Custom in a similar time frame went from looking like this with the Alico 5 staple pickup, but later got moved into humbuckers and also came back in 68 in a 2 humbucker version. So that leads you right up into the 70s. You can now start making anniversary models. This was the era that was the birth of limited editions like these. And the very first one was actually the 20th anniversary Les Paul Custom. It has it right here on the 15th fret. It just reads 20th anniversary. Outside of that, there was nothing really special to these. 3-piece tops were common. You could find them in a plethora of colors, from wine red to a vintage tobacco sunburst to the brand new white finish that is ever so popular. This was Gibson's first foray into an anniversary model. And then we have this guy. This is from 1977. It was a Guitar Center exclusive model for the true 25th anniversary of the Les Paul Custom. Les Paul hand engraved many of the pick guards, and most of them had this kind of cool 25th anniversary tailpiece to them. These are insanely rare guitars. You can find them in silver and gold hardware formats. But the reason this existed was for the next official widespread Gibson release. That is probably one of the most famous anniversary guitars of all time. The 50th anniversary Les Paul. Now this one was kind of cool because it was a dual celebration. It was 50 years of Les Paul, the man himself within the music business, and then 25 years of the Les Paul. Now as we just learned, it's 1952 through 1977 for true 25th. So this one coming out in 78, yeah, they fudged the numbers a bit, but this was a huge run of guitars, 3,411. It also birthed that new limited edition serial on the back, telling you what number you had out of that, and they were produced all the way through 1980. You had fancy pendants made. Early purchasers got an insanely valuable belt buckle today. They went all out advertising those things. Quite famously, this is the first time Gibson utilized a coil splitting switch on a guitar, introduced things like the Sustain Sisters, TP6 tailpiece, Series 7 pickups. But then we get to the one we're talking about today in 1982 as the 30th anniversary. So these are the first 4 Gibson birthday babies, essentially. Now I bring this all up because the 20th had the special inlay. The true 25th had a special finish. The secondary 25th had really unique, ultra cool stuff. And the 30th is by far the least popular out of all these bunches. Most people don't even realize they exist because they don't look all that special at the face value. So what makes this one special? Well, first off, we have a special inlay again that reads 30th anniversary, this time at the 19th fret. So again, borrowed from one of their first ones. However, these are actually true mother-of-pearl inlays. Which you might not know it, but the original 50s Les Pauls, if it wasn't a custom, it did not get pearl. So this is a unique feature. It's just like a Gibson Les Paul KM that they did in 79. It featured a unique antique gold finish. This is actually different from other gold tops. It's much darker than the regular gold tops of the era. Speed knobs aren't traditionally found on 58 gold tops. However, they were becoming popular around this time, so they actually came factory stock with them. They specially serialized these with letter ink stamped digits. So the first batch was A, second batch B, C, D, it keeps going on, and then it tells you what number you were out of that. But this is a big thing, ink stamped. And the next one, we just learned about these, it's an ABR1 bridge. Now you need to know, any Gibson Les Paul produced from 1976 through 1982, if it has an ABR1, that is incredibly special. Because it's not until 1983 that Gibson widespread puts them back into production on a Les Paul with the introduction of the prehistoric Les Paul reissue series. We just talked about it in this episode. You can go ahead and check it out for all the nitty-gritty details. But now here's the big question. Is this technically a prehistoric? one of those really special guitars. I mean, it's got the ABR1. It does have an ink stamp serial number. However, it's got that letter. So in my opinion, no, this is not a prehistoric, but this is just about as close as you can get to the earliest R7 prehistorics, because they did make Goldtop LP reissues. But as far as other disqualifying features, it has a Made in USA stamp. Some really early prehistorics can have it, and the same thing is true for having just the regular Gibson logo. It doesn't have the new squashed 50s looking style one yet. Now you can make the argument before 1983, some of the prehistoric runs don't have all those features yet, but the one thing that disqualifies it even further is this has a 3-piece mahogany neck. So to put you within the time frame, these are essentially Heritage Series Gibson Les Pauls, just upgraded from your Nashville style bridge to an ABR1 with a new paint job, because they've got the similar nicely enhanced top carve to them. The Heritage Standard 80s also had the 3-piece mahogany neck. They just changed a few things to make it a little bit more 50s and added the anniversary inlays. However, look at what I have here. It is a Gibson price list effective June 1st, 1982. If you flip on over to the back side of this, you can read finish codes, but most importantly, here's your Heritage Series. So that confirms to us that it was part of the Heritage Series. The LP 30th anniversary is listed for $1,199, but right under it, optional 1-piece mahogany neck for $100 more. So you technically can find a few 1-piecers out there, but I still think the mother of pearl inlays disqualifies it from being a prehistoric, but I would accept the argument that a 1-piece neck version of this could be considered a very early prehistoric. It kind of gets convoluted. The rules are a little bit wishy-washy when it comes to the early years, but anyway, this is a huge step in the right direction. This was incredibly special at the time. It just became irrelevant very quickly, but it's still a cool guitar, because you got to remember, 82 is a big transition year in general for Gibson. That's when they returned back to mahogany necks from maple across the entire lineup that was converted. They start to introduce weight relief, they get the smaller headstocks. So a lot of these features on this guitar were new at the time, but they just slowly changed the entire range. So most people don't even realize that's kind of what made these special in the first place. Now, as we just learned, the anniversaries usually stood for different things. It's not when the company first started, which was 1894, by the way. You don't get the 100th anniversary of that until 1994. So this is the 30th anniversary for the introduction of the trapeze tailpiece version. But it's not a reissue of that. This is actually the 1957. So if you actually look at the original ad for these, they explain it by saying it's the shape that was birthed in 52, but the bridge that perfected the intonation and the pickups that are oh so highly desirable. So it's kind of an amalgamation of all the best specs of the vintage Goldtops, but essentially a 57 or early 58 reissue. But they did not give us an explanation on the knobs. However, I decided to talk to Randy Leonard about these to see if he had any other additional details on our 30th anniversary friend here, and he actually has an unsolved personal mystery about these. He actually has this exact one in his ledgers, listed as being built in December 8th of 1982. Within his books, he did up 100 of these. However, 39 of those serials have a mysterious E marking beside them, and he can't remember why. He remembers lots of finishing issues on these. It wasn't uncommon for it to go back and forth between the finishing and final QC department before they would let it go out the door. So finding finish repairs on these will be very common. And he also recalls that many of the late serial numbers actually shipped out of the factory before the early ones. So at first he thought E, maybe it stood for ebony fretboard. That would make sense, kind of like the Heritage 80 Elites. However, the one we're talking about today is a marked E in his ledgers, and it's a rosewood. So then he was thinking, E, okay, Elite, 1-piece neck. We were just talking about that upgrade. Nope. This one's a 3-piecer. So the last thing he could think of was maybe it was initially meant for the European market. But outside of Goldtops, Randy had somebody reach out to him with what appeared to be a factory standard cherry sunburst example with a gold undercoat. And might you find an ebony one that got sprayed over due to wood grain issues or something? Maybe, but generally speaking, these were the antique gold finish. So we need to be on the lookout for something special when we tear this thing apart. So hopefully we can solve that mystery for Randy as to why these would be marked E. So let's go ahead and throw this one over on the workbench now to take an individual look at its parts and specs and get our detective hats on. After our good wipe down, here's what our antique gold finish is looking like. So you gotta remember, this is right around the time that Gibson rediscovers their whole top carve situation, so no more flat pancakes of the 70s. Let's go ahead and check out our pickups. We do not have a date stamp on the neck, nor do we have it on the bridge, so that can mean one of two things. They've rubbed off at some point, or these are replaced pickups, which could mean that they're mid-80s Tim Shaws when they briefly stopped doing the ink stamps, or it could be an earlier T-top. There's really no way to know unless we take off the covers, and seeing as they've never been touched, I'm not that interested to do it. Either way, these are fantastic pickups. However, usually you will find the Tim Shaw PAFs in here. Within the circuit, we've got 7.26 in the bridge, 7.13 in the neck, and the middle for fun, 3.6. But here's what our neck pickup cavity looks like. Short neck tenon. You can see your bare mahogany over here in this corner, but you can appreciate how dark the gold finish is right there. But I don't see anything crazy like a mahogany top or something. That's why it'd be marked E. It's just your regular maple top on this one, and I do not see anything unique to the bridge pickup cavity either. Just more of the same. However, I did notice something about this guitar between unboxing it and making this video that also disqualifies these from being prehistorics. You can see the seam lines to a three-piece top. I'm not sure if they're all that way, and maybe that's what the E marking could mean. And it's not like a really obvious seam line. You just have to catch it in the light just right, and you can see it right here running along the top. It's not just an impression, because if you get it just right, you can see it throughout it. Barely see the other one right over here. So those cheeky Norland era guys selling you this limited edition when they're marketing, oh, two-piece tops are really cool now on the Heritage series. We're just gonna paint it and no one will know. I'm definitely gonna have to document some more of these in the future to see if they're all that way or if this happens to be an anomaly. But sure enough, it is a true post-mounted ABR1 with no bushing in the body. And here's what the bridge looks like on this one. It looks era correct to me, and the tailpiece polished up nicely and looks good enough to me. But here's a look at our golden speed knobs. It's just your regular volume tone for bridge and neck pickup. But since this is made before 1985, they will have some age to them. It's just a little bit harder to see on the golden ones. But you also have your thumb bleeders. This is one of those really nice, relatively clean players grade ones where there are a few parts that have been replaced and it's got some nicks and dings. Unfortunately, this is not the right one for my own collection, so if you're interested in it, it will be available on my website. But if you can deal with some surface marks, like a few stray light nicks and dings, I think you're going to be happy with this one. Your pick guard left a mark here, but that gets covered up. Other than that, it's really just those three dings right there. Here's a look at the pick guard. Nothing too fancy. Now we can move on from our three-piece maple top and mahogany body to our mahogany neck, which is three pieces, and our rosewood fretboard. So can you spot the reason why this one will not stay in my collection? It has been refretted. But as a player, that's a good thing because these are known as the low wide fret eras because the frets in the 70s and 80s are typically low and wide. They don't have a lot of crown to them. So somebody just made it a little bit more extra playable by doing that, but they erased the fret nibs. But here's a word of advice on the 30th anniversary inlay. If you ever clean your fretboard, like I had to do today with steel bowl to get rid of finger gunk and whatnot, do not scratch this. They will wear off. So if you ever see one without that inlay, it just means somebody accidentally cleaned it off. But as is common when you refret a guitar, you also replace the nut. And this is a really nicely polished nut. I'm not sure what material it's made out of, but it's a nice tight fit and it's been profiled beautifully. The measure is 1.68 inches at the nut, 2.04 at the 12th. First fret neck depth 0.84 and 0.99 by the 12th. Here's a look at that neck profile at the first fret and the 12th fret. Just a nice rounded C. I'd say it's a kind of in-between neck profile, not overly huge, but not as small as it could be. And you might notice these cracks along the fretboard binding. That's the same thing as fret sprout. It's just when you have binding, it prevents the frets from sticking out, so you just get those light crack marks. That's common on most Gibson guitars. The next thing I noticed about this that might have something to do with the E, could it stand for error? Like the ones that got a finish touch-up? Because I do notice right up here, the binding kind of got chewed up a bit, and then it looks like maybe they would have done some sort of a touch-up because it's a whiter color there versus the darker one there. I'm not sure if that makes sense or not. Maybe it was done after the fact. We'll have to do a blacklight test to find out for sure. That's the only thing I noticed that was different so far, a slight color variation. Now we can finally see this headstock without the dust caked over it. So it's just your regular blocky Gibson logo, Les Paul metal silkscreen. Now our truss rod on this one. You've got all the tightening direction you could need, but it's loose if you try to loosen it, which means essentially this has hardly ever been used. It plays pretty well, but I would suggest like 10 to 11 gauge strings just to give the neck a little bit more of a bow as you slowly tighten the truss rod. If you want to rock 7 or 8 gauge strings, you might run into issues. But there is a little bit of finish chipping right here by the G string tuner. Now that's not all that uncommon for some finish chipping to occur around this style of Clusen. However, that's actually a replaced tuner. We'll look at that here in a second on the back. But here's a look at our beautifully aged truss rod cover. And now we can move on to the back. Are there any secrets hidden within our cavity? First off, this model still utilizes the shielding plate. This only has like a couple more years to live before they ditch it. Here's what this one looks like. Yeah, not stock and original. This pot dates to 1982, as does this one, but we just barely can't make out the week. This one over here dates to 1980, the 49th week. Now in 82, 83, it's not uncommon to find 2 80 dated pots and then 2 of the current year. So those probably are correct. However, DiMarzio 500K is not in the slightest. However, I think, isn't that how Adam Jones has his wired up, his personal 79? Just the one 500K, whereas I believe these are 300Ks. But you can tell some shenanigans were going on over here because you shouldn't have any dirt on that. And this was definitely just repurposed from something else. Factory solder work, usually they connect it like somewhere around here and then they go to a lug, not grounding it off right here and attaching it there. So that's somebody else's attempt on doing that. So that's why I say I don't know for sure what pickups are in here. It could be the restored originals. But whether T-Top or Tim Shaw, I can guarantee you they're going to sound great. But it looks like somebody played with a ground wire in this one as well, because you can see it kind of got wrapped up here around our toggle switch. So once again, this is a player's model. Bad parts get replaced. I might say, hey Trogly, I thought you said Randy Leonard built this. Where's our signature? Just because he didn't sign it doesn't mean he didn't build it. They just signed the really good ones, and like the really extra good ones get like extra stars by his father's signature. Here's some other things I noticed. While they're doing their solder work, they've kind of burnt our cavity in a few areas, including right there. That'll happen if you're not careful, and even if you are careful, it'll still happen. But we've got a metal output jack plate. Our strap buttons have been upgraded to Schaller strap locks in both of our locations this time, and our toggle switch also has that shielding ring around it. As far as our back plates, this model utilizes correct brown ones. All things considered though, the back cleaned up very nicely. It's got some nicks and dings and scratches, but this example actually has a lot of finish checking. And a lot of it is actually vertical, so that could mean that there were some moisture related issues with this guitar at some point in time. However, it made for a very interesting relic. I mean, it's not everywhere, but you kind of have to just appreciate this one in person to see it. You've got some of that like around your nut, but it's not like, oh no, is there a repair around here? It's just regular finish checking. But this model does feature thin binding in the cutaway. You just got to look closely to see your maple top there. And then you've got some nicks and dings around the edge, especially right there. But this is a 3-piece necked version. If you're selling a 1-piece neck upgraded one, I would like to document that model next, and probably hold one of those in my collection, as well as have a regular 3-piece one that's all original. And generally speaking, I would prefer an A serial number, but you know, whatever. But take a close look at your tuners. This is a very shortly lived variation where they put the Gibson branding on the Clusen styles. So it does become obvious when you look here that, oh yeah, that one has been replaced. This is a double ring, no line Clusen, whereas the original is double lined, double ringed. So thankfully, unless you're looking for the Gibson branding, you're not going to notice it because it fit in the exact same footprint. It didn't get larger or smaller. Sadly, the 80s Clusens don't always live that long, but probably dinged it up against something, popped the back off, and it was broke. But this one is B0034. And you might notice that the neck looks a little bit different in color than the body. Gotta remember, this is when Gibson liked to use this whole yellow grain fill. And we've talked about this on a few examples lately. Your sweat, as well as tuner lubrication, can actually seep underneath the finish and delete that yellow. So that's exactly what you've seen here, a player's sweat getting rid of that. And even sometimes I go, does that really happen? But yeah, I've seen it enough times. It really does. Blacklight time! Everything is looking very good on the front here. All plastics glowing the way I would hope to see. As usual, you see a little bit of sweat absorption in this area. And looking at our headstock, you can see the regular chipping of the lacquer around the tuners that even haven't been replaced, as well as the replaced one up there. But to me, this looks like a touch-up after the factory, because that does not glow right. And if they were just replacing it, you know, right afterwards, I'm sure it would glow about the same. So not really sure what that's about. It's not like it's a neck break or a reset or anything, because you don't have any signs of that. But on the back, oh my, I thought that looked a little strange. It was a little bit more red, but that is indeed a touched up area. And you can also see your burn mark from the solder iron and maybe a little bit of a light lacquer rub here. But I was surprised to see this on the neck. So we got a little bit of a stand rash right here, but this is how his sweat penetrated into the finish. He's actually got a little bit of a worn through area right here. That's still so glossy, smooth, and even. So once he wore through to the bare wood, he must have kept playing in that area and just naturally polished it up. But I can tell you, I just polished this neck. It feels nice and even. And thankfully, no surprises on this one as far as major breaks, cracks, or repairs, just a couple of light touch-ups. Here that is in regular lighting situations. You see that redness? That's a touch-up. And perhaps this lighting will show off that finish checking a little bit better. Now, if you're worried that this was sitting in water and it's brittle, no, not at all. It's not a brittle finish. You've got no obvious signs of that. But in the era of very heavy guitars, this one's not bad at all. 8 pounds, 15.6 ounces, right at 9 pounds even, almost. That's a really good weight for an 80s Les Paul. So let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how this one sounds. After hearing them, I think they might actually be mid-70s T-tops. They have that very certain clarity to them. Whatever they are, they sound great. There we go. We finally documented the 30th anniversary Les Paul. Who is this for? Someone who wants a guitar with a little bit of age but can't necessarily afford that $150,000 price tag for the original 1957 version that would get you close to this. Because this has most of the features of the modern day historics that you can buy brand new for a little bit more than $5 grand, but it has a little bit of something extra with the mother of pearl inlays and being an anniversary model and being from the 80s. It's gonna have some wear and tear to it. It's gonna feel worn in and have some character without paying for the Murphy Lab aging tax. things. So generally speaking, these are not all that highly collectible as far as anniversary models go. They're kind of the black sheep of the family, really. But if you look at them through the eyes of 1982, this is essentially the first time a real Goldtop was reissued with the nice ABR1 bridge and some other cool features. So they're historically significant in that aspect, but I kind of understand why people forget about these today, because a modern day R7 reissue is likely going to be cheaper and more historically accurate, if that's what you're going for. As far as the 70s, 80s Les Paul Standard and gold finish, yeah, you're gonna have a good time with this. I thought these pickups just sounded ridiculously clear. They almost have an active punch to them. So Troglodytes, if you're interested in being the next owner of this particular example, you can find it for sale on my website, troglysguitarshow.com. And if you're selling a cleaner, more original one, feel free to let me know. But we'll catch you guys tomorrow on the next episode. Take care.